Decoded.
All right, so have you ever been in one of those virtual meetings and someone just freezes mid-sentence? Like completely frozen.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's like they're staring off into space, 1,000-yard stare.
Exactly. And then there are those times when you accidentally share your screen and it's something, but let's just say it's not exactly work appropriate.
Those are the best. I mean, worst, but you know what I mean. Like that time with the cat filter, I think it was on Zoom, right?
Yeah, I am not a cat guy. Classic. But hey, welcome to Book Decoded, everyone. Today we are going to be talking all about Frederick Wilkinson's book, Ping, which, by the way, if you're looking for a quick but thorough way to get a handle on how we communicate in this crazy digital age, well, this book is a great place to start.
And for our listeners, you know, the ones who are always eager to learn new things and get those light bulb moments, Ping is full of fascinating ideas and stories. We're going to try to distill it down to the most important parts so you don't feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely. So we'll be covering a lot of ground today, like how our thinking has shifted about in-person versus virtual communication and how to be more productive with all these digital tools instead of letting them run our lives.
Yeah.
Oh, and we can't forget about the subtle ways we form impressions online.
Right. Like how do we build relationships when everything's virtual? And then there's the whole emotional side of digital communication. It's a lot, but it's really fascinating stuff.
It is. And one of the things that Ping does right off the bat is make you question some assumptions about communication. Like Wilkinson starts with this story about a doctor who needs to deliver some pretty serious news, a diagnosis. And, you know, your first thought might be that this is something that should always be done face-to-face, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like you'd want to be there in person to provide support.
But then Wilkinson kind of flips this script and he says, well, think about it from the other side. In this specific case, the family was actually able to receive the news in the comfort of their own home because it was done virtually, which actually made a huge difference because they had their support system right there with them and they didn't have to go through the added stress of being in a hospital environment afterward. So it wasn't just that virtual was okay. In this case, it was actually better.
Really makes you think, doesn't it? And Wilkinson even points out that research is starting to show that face-to-face isn't always the be-all and end-all. Sometimes using video calls or phone calls, emails, even text messages can be more effective. It all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And, you know, we're not all delivering life-changing diagnoses, but we all have those communication challenges at work or in our personal lives.
Totally. Like how many times have you been just a few desks away from a colleague and you send them a quick message instead of just walking over? It's like we're worried about interrupting them.
It's true. And the book goes beyond the office, too. Wilkinson talks about how important digital tools are for people in all sorts of jobs. You've got tradespeople coordinating with clients, retail workers checking their schedules, delivery drivers getting updates. Virtual communication is everywhere.
Which brings us to those moments that Wilkinson calls shudder-inducing. You know those times when virtual communication goes so hilariously wrong? We've all heard those stories about unexpected things popping up on camera or those awkward tech glitches.
I know, right? And they're funny in retrospect, but they really show how easily things can go off the rails in virtual settings. There's this one example Wilkinson gives about an executive who decides to communicate an unethical decision over email. And the point isn't about the ethics themselves, but about how permanent that email record becomes. Maybe they would have chosen a less permanent way to communicate if they'd thought about it more carefully.
Good point. It all comes back to being intentional, which is a big theme in Ping. He even talks about those subtle things that can impact virtual interactions, like those tiny delays in video calls that lead to that whole no, you go ahead thing.
Yeah, The Onion did a hilarious piece on that.
Oh, I saw that. So funny.
Yeah.
But it's true, though. Those delays can really throw things off.
Absolutely. And what Wilkinson emphasizes is that it's crucial to understand that different communication technologies have different characteristics. You know, like how many different cues you can pick up, what he calls cue variety, and whether the communication is happening in real time or not, which he calls synchronicity. All these things can really affect how the interaction plays out. So understanding those differences is essential for choosing the right tool for the job. Think about it like this. A face-to-face conversation gives you a ton of cues, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. But a text message, well, that has very few cues.
Right. And that's where the book is really helpful because it gives us the tools to think through which method to use and how to use it well. And it goes deeper into those core challenges of modern workplace communication. Wilkinson mixes in these really engaging stories with research on virtual communication, so you get practical strategies that are actually backed by science.
And he acknowledges that communication is always evolving, so there will always be new hurdles to overcome. The key is to develop the right mindset so you can face them head on.
Definitely. And that starts with some fundamental lessons. One of the biggest takeaways from Ping is that even if you're working in the same office, virtual communication is still super important. It's unavoidable, really. We're all virtual communicators now.
Couldn't agree more. And there's no one right way to communicate virtually. The best choice depends on the specific situation every time, so understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each method is key. A lot of people just communicate virtually on autopilot, They don't really think about the implications of their choices. But effective virtual communicators are much more deliberate.
And that's where the idea of communication mode richness comes in. Wilkinson suggests that understanding where a particular technology falls on this spectrum can help you avoid common pitfalls. Like imagine a spectrum where on one end you have face-to-face conversations which are very rich in terms of the information being conveyed, and on the other end you have a quick text message. Knowing where a communication method falls on that spectrum helps you understand how much potential there is for misunderstanding.
And then there's the PA-NG framework, which is a really helpful mental model for becoming a better virtual communicator.
Right. PANG stands for Perspective Taking Initiative Nonverbal and Goals. It's a great way to make sure you're not just communicating virtually, but communicating effectively. And we'll see how those elements play out throughout the book.
Okay, so let's move on to this idea of productivity. Are all these digital tools actually helping us get more done, or are they just a huge distraction?
Well, Wilkinson quotes David Allen, who says, meetings handled well reduce email. Email handled well reduces meetings, which I think is a pretty insightful statement.
Yeah, and the book starts by exploring how that constant stream of emails and instant messages and meetings can really kill our focus and productivity. But then Wilkinson shifts gears and argues that if we're smart about it, virtual communication can actually become a really powerful tool for getting things done more efficiently.
And he uses Wikipedia as an example, which is a brilliant one. Think about it, for centuries, creating an encyclopedia was a slow and difficult process. You often needed experts to be physically together in the same place. But then Wikipedia launched in 2001 with this model of global virtual collaboration, and it totally changed the game. Now anyone can contribute and access information from anywhere in the world. It's a perfect example of how virtual communication can boost productivity on a massive scale.
Absolutely. And Wilkinson also mentions companies like Shopify who are experimenting with having meeting-free days. And he talks about how people like Jeff Bezos, Mark Cuban, and Elon Musk are all pretty skeptical of meetings. They tend to rely heavily on email instead.
Right. Cuban even says he basically lives on email. He claims it saves him hours every day because he's not stuck in unnecessary meetings or calls.
But the book isn't saying we should get rid of meetings entirely. The point is to be strategic about it. You have to decide when a meeting is truly the best way to achieve your goals versus when an email or an instant message would be more effective.
Exactly. You really have to think about what you're trying to accomplish. And Wilkinson shares a personal story about how he spent days writing this detailed email to a professor. And then he finds out the professor just skimmed the email and agreed based on the first few sentences. A quick phone call would have been so much faster.
Oh man, I've been there. It's so frustrating.
It is. But it just goes to show that you need to match your communication method to the complexity of your message and what you're hoping to achieve. And it's not just about the other person's perspective, it's also about the perception of effort. Wilkinson brings up this study where someone cutting in line at a copy machine was more likely to get away with it if they gave any reason at all. Even a silly reason like, because I have to make copies. It worked better than not giving a reason at all.
So interesting. It seems like people just want to see some effort, even if it's not a great reason.
Right. And that connects to the challenges of taking turns in virtual meetings. The book points out that even those tiny delays in video calls can disrupt the flow of conversation. So you end up with people talking over each other and awkward silences.
Yeah. And that's why real-time brainstorming might actually be less effective than having people come up with ideas on their own and then discuss them together later.
Good point. So when it comes to productivity, the book takes a really practical approach based on the PANG framework. It's about taking the other person's perspective, thinking about how your message will be received. It's about taking initiative, choosing the best method, even if it requires a little more effort up front. It's about being mindful of nonverbal cues and understanding that some things might be missed or misinterpreted virtually. And ultimately, it's about keeping your goals in mind. Sometimes clarity is more important than speed, and sometimes it's the other way around.
And Wilkinson gives some really helpful advice about managing expectations around response times. Like, if you send an email that's not urgent, You can add a little note that says something like, "No need to reply until next week." That can take the pressure off the recipient and help them feel like they don't have to be on all the time.
I love that. It's all about creating a communication environment where people feel empowered to use virtual tools in a way that works for them.
Absolutely. And I think it really boils down to being more intentional and thoughtful about our digital interactions. We need to move away from just defaulting to what's easiest or what we've always done.
Couldn't agree more. By using the principles in Ping, we can transform our virtual communication from something that stresses us out and makes us feel unproductive into something that actually helps us get things done and build stronger relationships.
Totally. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Ping, let's recap a few key insights. First, it's essential to choose your communication method carefully based on the situation and what you're trying to achieve. And remember that P&G framework perspective, taking initiative, nonverbal, and goals. It's a great tool to keep in mind.
Second, virtual communication and productivity have a complex relationship. It can be a huge help like with Wikipedia, but it can also be a real drain if you don't manage it well. So be strategic about when you need a real-time meeting versus when you can use something like email or instant messaging.
And finally, remember that we form impressions and build trust in virtual settings in some pretty surprising ways. Things like your video background or even typos can have a big impact.
So true. Okay, so here's a little piece of actionable advice that you can take away from this deep dive. Before you send your next message, especially if it's complicated or sensitive, take a moment to think about it from the recipient's perspective. Ask yourself how they might interpret your tone. Is this really the most effective way to get your message across? Taking that extra moment to consider their perspective can save you a lot of time and prevent misunderstandings.
It's such a simple thing, but it can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And now for a final thought to leave you with. In a world where we're constantly connected, how can we create space for deeper thinking and more meaningful interactions? Ping gives us some great tools to start with, and it's a question that's only going to become more important as technology continues to evolve.
It is. And we encourage all of you to keep exploring these ideas and think about how you can apply the insights from Ping to your own daily communication challenges. Mastering virtual communication is a journey, and being mindful and intentional is the first step.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Book Decoded.